Hello and welcome to BOSCA Presents, presented by Mammoth Sports Construction and CEI Engineering. My name is John Hartwell, and I am the designer behind Hartwell Studio Works, a sports branding shop serving the small college athletics market. BOSCA Presents is a monthly series of live webinar conversations featuring athletics leaders discussing topics of importance for the small college athletics community. Our topic today is strategic approaches to adding sports with a panel of 3 athletic directors from around small college athletics: Ryan Erwin from East Texas Baptist University, Fran Reidy from St. Leo University, and Aaron Sagraves from Cornerstone University. Because of a technical difficulty, this video is joining the presentation in progress as our guests answer a question about the specific factors they take into consideration when contemplating whether or not to add a sport.
Start that program. But we also talked about women's wrestling. Well, there's no girls wrestling in Michigan and in certain states that are surrounding us. So the opportunity to recruit students to come to campus wasn't very high. But men's wrestling, it was really high just because of the factor of Michigan high school wrestling is one of the hottest sports in all the country. And so we have an opportunity to recruit that sport at a really high level. So those are the 2 of the biggest ones. But it always goes back to us on our campus. How do we want to further the vision and purpose and ultimately the mission of our school? And if you're going to start something, you need to have it go into that vision and purpose. And so we have 6 statements that we made in an athletic department on our campus that we want to hold by. If we put up a new program, we want to make sure they uphold that vision and purpose for our athletic department.
Ryan, how about you? What specific factors help you evaluate?
One thing that we always start with is facilities. I think kind of Aaron hinted at that, but with 2 gyms that we currently have, a competition gym and a practice gym. There's other sports that we've considered, like a wrestling, but we already maxed out on gym usage, and so getting creative with all of our teams that use those facilities, as well as kinesiology. And then you throw in intramurals, the gym space becomes an issue. And so sometimes we have to get creative. Like our track and field team are using a local high school track for that. We're more of a distance program anyway, so it's not a huge factor. But facilities is something we always look at. And I would say, kind of agree with Aaron, originally recruiting. Can we recruit that type of student, that sport to our area? But we've kind of thrown ourselves a curveball in the last couple of years. We added ice hockey in East Texas. And so we partnered over in Shreveport, Louisiana, about 30 minutes away, with a hockey rink. And so, this past fall, we had 36 hockey players, 10 from Canada, 1 from Sweden, 1 from Hong Kong. And so just really kind of widen our net there. And the hockey world is pretty tight knit. So it's spread pretty fast that we had an ice hockey team in East Texas. And, we're turning players away and competing at a high level. And so that's really helped. And just being different. I mean, there's not many teams in the state of Texas that have ice hockey. Now, it is considered club, but all of our club sports are under the umbrella of athletics. We treat them just like our NCAA student athletes, with study hall, with eligibility requirements, with drug testing. And so that's really played a big part for us, is that just kind of getting it out there and doing it right, and having the support from the university is huge, from a facility to an operating budget to coaching staff and salaries.
Fran, how about you?
Even though St. Leo is in Florida, excuse me, we've always recruited the Northeast. And so Lacrosse, which was one of our more recent, I guess 10 years ago, if you want to call that recent, but we really felt like from a business standpoint, from a market standpoint, we would be first. We would get into the market first. We'd get ahead of everybody else. We felt that the sport was definitely headed to Florida. And so we started it, and we did. We won right out of the gate. We waited on the women's side, and 2 of our competitors, Rollins and Florida Southern, started it, and we haven't been able to catch them, ever since they did that. But it was really a Northeast sport. Would they come to Florida and play it? Florida was just starting lacrosse, but there is no shortage of student athletes that want to come and play lacrosse in the state of Florida. I certainly agree with Ryan on the facility part. We added acrobatics and tumbling. So the other thing you have to figure out is, so good for acrobatics and tumbling in that it's not offered in a lot of places. So again, lots of young women are looking for a place to do this sport, but we really miscalculated on the facility piece, and it's really been a struggle for us. I'm gonna get out of it now that we're opening up a new wellness center, and so I'll be able to relocate them at least in the mornings. But didn't do enough homework on what that facility challenge was going to look at. So I'm telling everybody here. Sometimes you know after the fact you're like, oh, I didn't do enough work here. So, but again, it's a sport where instantly 30 young women in the first year are ready to come to our school and compete in acrobatics and tumbling. And then the last one we added recently was beach volleyball, a natural for Florida. We had a perfect piece of property for it. We built 5 courts. It's a beautiful facility. And again, it's more of a Florida sport, gets us to compete against Division I schools as well as Division II schools. So again, that one we felt we could recruit to, give an opportunity to, and yet travel-wise, we could stay in the state of Florida. Not a huge budget for beach volleyball.
That's excellent. For me, often I just started with participation numbers. How many high school kids are playing this sport within our region? And then, as you all mentioned, factors like facility availability and various other things came into play. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about revenue from new sports. How big of a factor is the anticipated tuition and fee revenue to your making a decision about a sport? And does that anticipated revenue also impact what your operating budget for the program is going to be? And Ryan, I'll let you start on that one.
Yes, sir. That's pretty much the number one factor for us when we're looking at sports. Is it profitable? And not that we're trying to make, balance the budget on it or make from a university standpoint. I'm sure our CFO is looking at that. But anytime I present a budget of looking at sport addition or even sport expansion, we're working on budgets currently right now for next year, and met with our baseball coaches about starting we call it developmental team, but basically a JV program. And so meeting with the CFO, that was his biggest question is, okay, what's the anticipated roster size? And what's the budget going to cost to add this program? And that includes not just within baseball for uniforms and transportation and equipment, but also support staff, coaches. Are we going to add another coach or give a coach a raise or a bump to take this new responsibility on? But other areas throughout campus. And so it's definitely one of our biggest factors when we're looking at it and evaluating whatnot. Now, when we're looking at, sometimes I think Fran mentioned early on, looking at a Title IX perspective. Sometimes we, we'll add a women's sport because we do have football. So the 150 football players, we've got to add several women's sports to kind of balance that out. And so in those situations, we're not so worried about dollars. It's more of numbers to get that back into compliance with Title IX. And so the revenue is an area. Like I said, our enrollment's gone up 25% in just over 5 years. And so our university admission staff and other folks on campus want to see that trajectory continue to go up and get over the 2,000 to 2,500 total students here on campus. And so that is definitely a large factor in what we do. Without athletic scholarships, it's actually easier being Division III. We're not having to factor in scholarships like we were when I was at Dallas Baptist or Rogers State, both Division II schools.
Fran, how about you? How important is the revenue impact of a new sport?
It's really important, and I think the thing, I know this group is looking for what have we learned. So as Ryan said, it's pretty simple. The calculations are pretty straightforward, right? We're going to have 30 athletes. They're going to generate this much tuition. Our school doesn't like to count the fees, but we know they do make a lot of money off of the fees. But the bean counters don't necessarily want to let you count that when you're trying to do that calculation. And then you have your expenses, as Ryan said, you have your salaries, your operating expenses, your benefits. Those things are really, really important. I think the thing that you have to guard against as you try to sell this, or if you are asked to add a sport, is you do need to educate your admissions people, which you probably already do, but rosters are finite numbers. And sometimes they think you can just add another 3, another 4 people onto those rosters and just think that this is going to continue to grow. And so you have to make sure that they know that at some point, and especially early on, you might add 20 people in year number 1, but at some point it's gonna stop growing, or you just can't sustain it, or they're not going to give you more money to do it, which means you're trying to dress or travel, more people with the same amount of money. So again, things that we learned was, the admissions office just sees, a head count go up, but we're trying to win, or we're trying to make sure that there's a quality experience for the student athlete. And we know if those rosters get too big and people don't travel, people don't get to play, then you have a retention issue, and that's never a good thing. So all I would say is you need to go into it your eyes wide open, but more importantly, the other people that are involved in this process around campus need to understand that at some point your roster is full, and you're going to put up a stop sign, and they're not necessarily going to like that, but it'll save you a lot if you do it on the front end, and make sure they have a clear picture of what this is going to look like in 4 years, and maybe not what it looks like in year number 1.
Aaron, how about you?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add to what those two guys said. They kind of encaptured all of that. I think the way that Fran left it right there is key. As I've got the last 2 years, we started men's volleyball and men's wrestling, and I've been able to be a part of the direct meetings with our accounting, our admissions, and my administration to help put together these budgets as they go forward. And he hit on it there, because they think that the number of it is going to continually increase in roster size, when that's just not the reality. And so we've been able at Cornerstone to build out a 1, 3, and 5 year projection of that roster, and really take our time in. I'm not being asked to say, hey, you have to add 25 new men's wrestlers next fall. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to add slow in year 1, in year 2, year 3, and get to a certain point. And now we've actually twisted it. I'm actually meeting with our accounting people last week, this week, and next week to go over, all right, let's do this for every sport. So we have 20 sports, including men's wrestling, now starting next year. And we're gonna start a men's basketball program. We're gonna start a men's soccer program or women's softball program, and kind of build it from scratch and see what we can do strategically going forward as we look to expand more rosters. Is there opportunity to grow in size? Is there opportunity to decrease in size and really provide a better student athlete experience? And so I've been really thankful for our administration to be able to look at it from that direction, because of the way we've done these last 2 programs. And Fran, you hit on it there, and I've been so thankful for that. So we will continue to look at that. And yes, there's definitely the formula that you all come up with of how this is going to add money to the bottom line or add money to your department. Where does that money go? That's when I've been looking at, can we get some of that money back to expand facilities, to expand opportunities for our student athletes?
That's great. Fran, I think, made a great point in terms of there is a limit. Adding 5 more players can add a significant expense, whether it's uniforms or travel expense or equipment. And so it's important to understand that there are some limits, and not to mention the experience that the students have. If you really build a massive roster, the likelihood that you're going to retain them is very challenging. Okay, so we touched a little earlier, I think Aaron used the term essential needs. So when you're adding sports, talk about the impact that has on other areas, particularly administrative areas. So sports information, athletic training, compliance. What impact does that have, and what recommendations do you have on how people should plan for the increased workload in those areas? And Fran, I'll ask you to start on this one.
Yeah, so it goes back to that calculation that you're trying to make from the beginning to say, not only is it going to, I need this operating budget, and I need this travel budget, and I need this staffing for the coaches, but how is it going to impact the rest of the department? For those of us in the NCAA, we had the Arrington case, which meant, we now have to have athletic trainers at certain practices. There's no, hey, we'd like them to be, riding around on a golf cart. No, they have to be there. And so again, it's making sure that, you educate the lawyer on your campus to make sure that you don't leave yourself exposed from a risk management standpoint. But we were fortunate. The other thing, admissions wants heads in beds, but we want to graduate student athletes. We want them to have a great experience. And so if they don't get, the proper athletic, the sports medicine, if the sports information doesn't do a great job with their bios and, streaming games and all of the other pieces that make them stay, then you're replacing them all the time. They're bringing, 500 in the front door and 300 going out the back door. It just doesn't work that way. So these other, pieces of the department, as you add more customers, I know they don't like it in higher ed when we use those words, but they're customers. And are we keeping our customers happy? Are we keeping them healthy? Are we providing, a great experience so that they stay and hopefully become donors and supporters of the university when they graduate? So again, it's a matter of making people understand you just can't continue to add bodies without adding staff, whether it's, administrators at games or at least money to, hire security, whatever it takes. But again, it's an education process that you have to do as the, as the lead person to make them understand that you just can't have these games and do it all on your current staff. If they build a new resident hall, they put RAs in it and they put another resident hall director in there. Well, if you have two more teams, guess what? You need another resident director and you need some people in the hall. So you have to put it in terms that they understand, which is if you add people to the equation, you're going to have to add staff to the equation to make it successful.
Aaron, what would you add to that?
Yeah, well, me as a former sports information director, definitely understand the needs for this, especially in my previous role as an assistant AD for communications, going from 6 sports to 34 sports. And we gained one additional person in those 7.5 years, which I was thankful for because you can only be in one spot at one time. So each sport that we've added since I've been here, that has been, if not number one, really close to number one as a priority. Sports information and athletic training, as well as facilities. I think that's the other one, because we learned that, as you start new sports, you may need new facilities. Who's going to run that facility? Who's going to take care of that facility? You're going to rent out that facility when your teams aren't using it for rental opportunities and revenue. So I think those are the 3 biggest areas: sports information, training, and then facility management. And we've been really fortunate we've added now 2 graduate assistants in those areas over the last 2 years, now 3 years. And that has been a huge help to us because, as you all know, graduate assistants, they just want to work. They just want to get some experience. They just want to help out wherever they're needed. But now we're also looking at how addition of sports affects the overall campus structure, kind of like what Fran said with the dorms. When they build a new dorm, you're going to need that extra space. Well, if you had a football team, for example, that's 120, 150. I've heard upwards of 200 people for a football roster, and that's going to add in students in a classroom. So is it more faculty? Is it more programming? Is it more dining common space? There's so many different things that factor into it with the number that you look at for a specific athletic program. When you start a golf team or a tennis team, yeah, that number is definitely not going to be nearly as high. But we're looking at men's wrestling of having, 30 to 40 young men here on our campus over the next few years. That's going to not only add to our department, but it's going to add to the rest of college campus. So those factors have to weigh into it. My priority just in athletics has to be those athletic training, sports information, and facilities.
Okay. And Ryan, what would you add to this conversation?
Well, very similar to both these guys, but compliance plays a factor too. When we got to ETBU, there were just over 250 athletes. Now we have over 600. So that first part of the year, our compliance staff, is really bogged down, and so trying to have support for them to be able to get through that. And then when we really look at adding sports, another consideration that we look at is what semester, what season do they compete in? Because then is that going to further stretch our SID staff, our athletic training staff? And so, golf is somewhat easy. That we did not have that at ETB before I got here. Like you said, a small number, kind of take care of themselves with athletic training and sports information to, the Monday, Tuesday tournaments, which are usually slower times. So that was a consideration for us as well as when they'll be competing, when they'll be practicing. And do we have coverage, especially with the ATs and sports information? And then outside athletics, I know I can probably say, being honest, wasn't really a concern of mine previously. But now that I've taken over some new responsibilities here on campus as vice president for student engagement and athletics, which includes housing, it's really real to me now. Now I see what they were complaining about, and I hear it firsthand each day. And so knowing that when we add, 300 athletes in the course of 3.5 years, that and we haven't expanded the resident directors. So we've added RAs, but not resident directors, and not a huge increase in faculty, but our classrooms are getting more full, or less full now with COVID and 50%. So, but adding the Zoom into that as well. And so it's really been a kind of opening experience for me, kind of getting out of my silo in athletics to see there is a huge impact across the campus when we have enrollment growth, which is good, but then getting the others on campus to see that there needs to be expansion in other areas as well, mainly in staffing.
Well, isn't that interesting that Fran used the housing analogy, and he wouldn't have to do that with you because you're in charge of that as well as athletics. I will say in my case, a primary thing that we got out of the expansion of athletics was a full-time compliance person. And the way that it happened really was not the athletic director asking for it, because as we all know, just when athletics asks, we rarely get anything. But the way it happened was our registrar pretty much demanded it and said, we've got to have somebody. So I think that's great stuff. I want to switch gears here a little bit, and I want to talk about a coach. The coach that you have on campus for any sport is critical. We're only as good as the people that we surround ourselves with. But in particular, when you're starting a new sport, there's some pressure to find the right person. So let's talk a little bit about the coaching search process for a new sport and the keys that you all have found and considered in finding a new coach. And Aaron, we'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We just named our new wrestling coach, so this is pretty fresh in my mind. I'll be honest, we've added 2 new coaches and an assistant AD in the last 2 months, so I'm interviewed out at this point. I don't know if I can do any more anytime soon. But really, the first step for me when I either have an opportunity to hire a new coach or even starting a new program is, what are my connections in the athletic world? And just thankful for people that are on this call. I reached out to a lot of you guys that are on this call. I was like, hey, we're starting this program. Where did you start? Is it somebody in your state? Is there somebody you recommend? Is there just that little bit of a network? And so I think the opportunity that we have to build relationships in this regard is a huge help. Then I've got a great relationship with the high school ADs in the Grand Rapids area in the state of Michigan, that I reach out to them too, and just see what the opportunity might be there to expand that coaching search. And obviously, when you post a job, you're going to get plenty of resumes through email, whether it's just email or on the actual job application. Certain sports are different. I feel like when you do a basketball search, you get about 400 emails. When you do another search, you get everybody that applies online, right? So it's a little bit different in that regard. But ultimately, for me, it's about the building of relationship. How can I use the relationships that I've got with other administrators, with either high school, college, club directors, things like that? I want to build as big of a pool as I can to start with. And then again, Cornerstone is unique. Our our college is a Christ-centered university that we want that to be a main aspect when we hire a coach. So there's a lot of coaches that are just eliminated from that regard, from the application standpoint. And that usually narrows our window down in a big way. So the biggest thing for me is relationships. How do we build those with those candidates and get to know them on a personal level, more importantly than the X's and O's level? And as I did the men's wrestling search, I was skeptical at first. I didn't really know a whole lot about the sport of wrestling, to be honest, but I was blown away by the candidates that we got, not only from within Michigan, but outside of Michigan and from the East Coast. And we hired ours from the state of Virginia. And so I just was so thankful for that opportunity that we had to get to know so many different individuals.
Okay, Ryan, I'm going to ask you to answer the same question, but I'm going to add one twist, which is, and Fran, I want you to consider this as well. Do you give any consideration to hiring a coach who has started another program? So, Ryan, will you add to this conversation about coaches?
Yeah, I think for adding sports, once you've got the decision, got the approval from the administration, it's kind of on you as an athletic director, as an administrator, that it was your idea or your thought process and your plan to adding sports. The next most important decision is the coach, because they've got to then go, especially if you're adding for an enrollment reason, they've got to go find the student athletes. Now, of course, down the road, you want them to be competitive and win, I would assume. But early on, they've got to be able to fill a team in usually a short amount of time and not an ideal time frame. So I think that's huge, is someone that you have full confidence in, that's going to just take the ball and go with it and not have you micromanage or continue to push them. Someone that's going to go fill a roster in a year, and then maybe that's a roster full of freshmen. Maybe that's a roster of, a mix of that. But I think that's usually for me the most pressure when I can get it approved. I can show the financial impact of the university and the enrollment growth, but then finding someone to go do it. And, I've hired some that did a really good job and made me look great, and others that I had to really push them. And I was doing way more recruiting than I wanted to for a sport I had really no knowledge of. And so having that is there and really getting them ingrained in the process, because if they've had experience coaching before, or coaching for sure, but adding a sport, that's definitely a plus. Many times when we add new sports, we don't get many people that want to come do it over again, maybe for a variety of reasons that is, but they've already done it once, they built it. But I think I've talked to those people that have added it and kind of told them that, they've given us the horror stories of what they would do differently. And I think that's good information to have when you have a new staff member coming in, especially with a new sport.
Okay. And Fran, how about you?
Well, listen, doing coaching searches in Florida is never a challenge, except you have to figure out who's trying to retire and who really wants to coach. So, and I'm going to make Ryan mad here, but typically when we've started programs, we've gone after successful Division III coaches who are 5 to 6 to 7 years in, who have already proven that they can build, right? Whenever I hire a coach, I ask myself, can this person do what it is that I'm asking them to do? They have a proven track record of doing exactly what I'm hiring them to do. So early in my career, I hired Division I people who had never been a head coach, and I got burned every time. So I am much more comfortable hiring D2 head coaches, D3 head coaches who have already done what I'm asking them to do. But in ours, it's typically somebody, and I like the D3 only because they haven't had scholarship money. And typically when we add a sport, we add the scholarship money as we go. We don't drop a wheelbarrow full of money in their lap. It's staggered so that they will learn how to manage it, and they'll know that they're going to have some new money coming in each year as they build this thing, and they don't use it all at once. But I tend to look for people who have already done what it is that I want them to do. So if someone has built a program, not necessarily started a program, but if they've built a program, if they took over a bad program and made it better, but it's going to take some time. They have to know that I'm not expecting instant success, that this is going to be a process, that they're willing to dig in and take a few years and know that I'm willing to be patient with them, and I'm not expecting instant results. But that's how we've done it. Again, some sports are more of a challenge. So acrobatic and tumbling, guess what? There's no coaches out there. You're probably getting somebody who graduated, from college 2 years ago, 3 years ago. There's a very limited pool. So that's a lot different than if I'm adding the sport of lacrosse or, a more established kind of sport. So sometimes you have to go that route. I have a volleyball opening now. We went to the Elite Eight 2 years ago. That's a completely different search and what I'm looking for than someone to start up a program. Again, I'm looking for a builder, high energy, a person that's a seller, that's going to be able to go out and really sell themselves. So I don't want a 25-year veteran who's used to his assistants doing that. I need the person that's going to be front and center. It's going to be the program, the brand, and that's what I try to do when we start a new sport.
That's great. I think I would only add one of the things I tell coaches when we've added a sport is that they still have to be very thoughtful about who they recruit. Sometimes there's this pressure to, I've got to have 25, I've got to have 35, and you take chances or you allow some people onto your team that eventually end up burning you because you weren't thoughtful and you weren't contemplating the character of the individual so much as you were just trying to hit a number. Okay, well, we've got about 12 or 15 minutes left, and we already have several questions. So what we're going to do now is to make sure this is worthwhile for the people who are participating is we're going to switch over to the questions that we've received. And John Hartwell, I think you have one to begin with.
I do. So the question here is, as institutions transition for an online delivery, how much was adding a sport a driver to enhance the on-campus life and engagement? Did it help your on-campus non-athletic enrollment grow? And I'll throw that out to whoever wants to take it first. I'm sorry, Aaron. Okay.
Aaron, you want to try that?
Yeah, I mean, our on-campus experience, that's what we sell actually at Cornerstone, because the schools that are around us a lot of them are going online, and obviously the kids are choosing not to live on campus and to save some money that way, which is very understandable. But we are still going to sell our on-campus experience, and we've had a lot of discussions about how do we do that. Sports gives us that opportunity, or the athletic programs give us that opportunity to be on ground because of the demand of practices and schedules and things like that, plus the opportunity to grow in relationship with the coaching staff and just that mentor-mentee relationship that we so strongly are big advocates for. And I can't say I've really seen too much data on this yet per the question, but it's definitely something that's come up of like, how can we add to the on-campus experience? We talk about that community experience, the opportunity to support each other, the brother-sister team that we have on campus as well. And so I think that's something that you have to continually think about as students that are coming into college right now are really thinking of how to not cut corners, but how to save money, how to make sure they budget wisely. And one of the biggest ones we hear from them is the opportunity to live at home while still attending college. And now with the online that we're learning over the last 11 months with COVID, it's even bigger.
Okay, I've got a question here from my buddy Scott Noble out in New Mexico, and Scott's question I think is an interesting one. He asked, what percentage of the tuition dollars goes back to athletics? So I'm going to answer in my world, and then Ryan or Fran, I'm going to maybe ask you to respond. Scott, the way we've done it is when we're contemplating a new sport, we do some financial models that will show us what the expected revenue ought to be. And out of that model, we're going to create a budget. So the part that comes back to athletics is the budget that is a piece of the total revenue that we expect from the program. So all the tuition goes to the university, and we're allotted a budget that we've worked together on, and that's how we do it on my campus. Ryan or Fran, have you all had a different approach with where the tuition dollars go? Ryan?
At ECU and DBU is very similar to that. All the money went to the university, and we had the allotted budget. Now at RSU, we had the student fees built in, so the student fees were what funded athletics. And if there was a deficit there, we either fundraised or had other avenues to work with administration. But currently, and what we've been able to see with the addition of most of our sports is all those funds do go to the university.
Fran, would you add anything?
No, again, as a private, it's same as you, Jim. It's not as defined as student fees or anything like that. We do zero-based budgeting as far as operations goes. Those budgets change every year. So I wish it was. I'm a numbers person, so the way they do things is not very comfortable for somebody like me. I would like to have a much more data-driven conversation, but that's not how we do it here. So it is kind of at the mercy of the university when it's all said and done, which I would avoid if you can on your campuses. I would, whether it's the student fees or some other percentage. I know I'm not getting a good deal the way that we do it.
I'm going to be honest and tell you, we've had better luck getting appropriate budgets for new sports than we have for providing the budgets for our sports that have been here for a while. John Hartwell, you have another question?
Yes. So this is going to be from Corey Bray. For those who added a club sport, how did you conduct the search for the head coach compared to how you normally conduct a search for the head coach of an NCAA sport? He's specifically interested in how to cultivate a good candidate pool.
Okay, Ryan, you mentioned club hockey. Why don't you take a first stab at that one?
Well, with hockey, we had a relationship with the Shreveport Mudbugs, which is a junior level team there in Shreveport. And one of their former players had volunteered with the team for a few years, not our team, but the Shreveport team. And it just kind of fell in our lap, honestly. When we announced that we were going to start the process or met with the Mudbugs, he came out and was a fit for the university. I think Aaron talked about earlier, finding someone that understands the culture of the university, and it was someone that had knew about the university and lived in the area. So that just was by chance. We lucked out and had that with our other, like bass fishing. We added that a few years ago. We had a university employee that had actually fished on the collegiate circuit. And so we, added to his current job responsibilities to take that over. And so, but some of the others we've actually done searches for, because even though they're club, they're full-time employees of the university. Now they may do something else on campus to come up with their job responsibilities or to make it a full-time position. But they are, full-time employees. And so we've been able to do a search and find someone we felt like would be a fit and would be able to start that program.
Jim, you're on mute.
Fran or Aaron, anything to add on that?
I would add only great that Ryan has the full-time position for the club coach. I would, in my particular situation, I draw a circle of 35 miles from campus because it would be a part-time role. And the only other thing I would tell you is if you do that, and then you have aspirations. So when we did lacrosse, we took it from club to a varsity sport. And when the club coach didn't get the job as the full-time, NCAA Division II coach, there were some hard feelings there. So be careful if the club sport is going to remain club, but I would just say if this person has aspirations of it becoming a varsity sport, make sure you have conversations early on as to what, that might look like. If they're just, the person that's local and has some knowledge, but, isn't going to be that person if you ever do elevate that sport. I would just tell you to be careful because they're typically great community people, and you don't need that person on the wrong side of you in the community if you can avoid it.
I have one final question. I think we have time for it. And the question is, where does this decision or this idea originate? Does it originate in athletics? Does it originate from the university administration? Does it initiate from the board of trustees? And I'm going to at least tell you in my case, as I mentioned, initially the idea of growing enrollment was a university administration conversation. I responded that I thought athletics could contribute to that. I will say that over the years, I've either had a trustee or some administrator on campus mention, you should do this or you should do that. They didn't mention it in a way like demanding that we do it. And I'll say with cheerleading in particular, that was an idea that originated outside of athletics, but we'll go around the horn on this. Aaron, in your case, as you all have added new sports, has that been driven by athletics or outside of the department?
Nothing driven by athletics. I'll be very honest. Like the initial conversation, when my president and I sat down and met about different opportunities, he had asked me, hey, if you were going to start a sport, what would you want? And my number one was men's volleyball, because we had 10 women's sports and 8 male sports at the time. So the opportunity to go with a male sport needed to be the next one. And men's volleyball, because we already had all those opportunities. We had the gym, we had the nets, we had the volleyballs. I mean, I know they're different in men's volleyball, but we had almost everything to start that. So that seemed to be the easiest one. But in the last 7 years, and even the last 10 years at Cornerstone, donations and a specific donor has been the main driver for our sports. So baseball, if you know anything about Cornerstone baseball, if you Google Cornerstone baseball field, it looks like a minor league baseball stadium, which I'm very thankful for. It gets a lot of publication out there, and we're very blessed to have that. That was very donor driven. It was a relationship with our president that wanted to have his grandson or grandsons have an opportunity to go to Cornerstone to play baseball. We didn't have a baseball program, but we needed a stadium, and there's what we got out of it. Tennis was the same way, and men's wrestling was the same way on our campus, where we have relationships with different people in the community that wanted to see a specific sport. And thankfully, out of that, we've gotten some incredible facilities. Our men's wrestling facility, our wrestling center that will eventually probably grow into a women's wrestling program as well. It's all donor driven. And so we have a brand new wrestling center starting construction here next week, and we're super excited about that. But those were the main drivers for us. Admissions and enrollment, definitely a piece of that, of how could we add 10 to 15 students. But I'm looking at how could we expand our current programs. Our track and field program 5 years ago only had 55 kids in it. That's an easy program to add 20, 30, 40 kids potentially, depending on our facility structure.
Okay, Fran, how about you?
So mine usually came from the administration. I think more important of where it starts, it's who's there around the table at the end. Because if everyone that's involved is not there, you're not going to be successful. My other recommendation would be that you under promise and over deliver. You have to be careful. There's going to be expectations, and you don't want to make a bad deal. If it's a bad deal, you need to tell them it's a bad idea, and that's not easy sometimes. But you're the expert on the sports. And so not every good idea can work. And so if it ends up after you've done all your research and you've called up, other people in the business, and it's not a good idea, you need to tell them that. Otherwise, undoing it is very difficult and not good for your student athletes. So, but at the end, it might start with one person, might start with a donor, but my recommendation is everybody needs to be at the table, and everyone has to be in agreement as to how this is going to be done. or it's going to end up being not a good outcome.
I agree. And Ryan, how about your perspective?
We've started a number of sports, and it seems like everyone's a little different, from student interest to a community member that reached out that needed a job about starting a dance team, and having those conversations, from a donor, from board members, a little bit of everything. So, and kind of to piggyback what Fran mentioned there, under promise over deliver. The big area I always say when looking at sports is give yourself plenty of time. Don't make a decision in April to start in August to recruit a team of 15, 20. You can never have too much time. I remember we added men's basketball at DBU. We hired a coach 2 years out, and a lot of people thought we were crazy. But we had one whole year of recruiting. We brought in a group of 5 or 6 that were basically their redshirt year. They brought in the rest of the team the next year. And so giving yourself plenty of time and being upfront honest with the higher ups or whoever is helping make those decisions on the CFO or whatnot. It is hard to get approval to have an extended amount of time because you have expenses before you have revenue. You have to hire a coach and have a little bit of recruiting budget before you have students on campus. So that is always an area that I always try to focus in on and tell them, look, it's going to take a little bit to build it up. Or if it's track program, we eventually want to get to 60 kids or 70 kids on the team, but it may be only 20 or 30 the first year as we stage it up. So, but we all know we get pressure from all different sides, from current students and athletes to parents and donors and presidents. So trying to play all those in and play the political game is always, you got to be sure not to step on toes as well.
Well, it's part of the job. Well, I'm grateful. What a great panel. Fran and Aaron and Ryan, thank you guys so much for taking the time today to share some of your insights and wisdom. I would encourage those folks who participated, if you have other questions, these are 3 guys that know what they're doing. And so I encourage you to reach out to them. We are planning another virtual presentation in March. And we'll also tell you that we're preliminarily thinking about an in-person BOSCA workshop this summer. So I did say thinking; it's not definite at this point, but at least want to put that on your schedules for possibly July 18th through the 20th. Again, thank you to Mammoth Sports Construction and CEI Engineering for their sponsorship. And I hope that you all have a great day and a great week. Thanks for joining us.